there's also high-level waste, because to make nuclear bombs, what we did was we extracted the plutonium from that spent fuel, and in doing so, you're left with all the fission products and everything, which ended up being a liquid mess. So that's in these big, huge million-gallon tanks. At the Hanford site, at Idaho, at Savannah River, and there's a little bit in West Valley, New York. And so this material is slowly being turned into glass. It's actively being turned into glass at Savannah River and at West Valley, and at Hanford, we hope one day they get their act together and they actually turn it into glass. And same thing with Idaho. And that will eventually need to go into some kind of geologic repository. So we do have in this country actually the only operating geologic repository for nuclear materials in the world. And this is the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, which is near Carlsbad, New Mexico. Somebody got the idea, knowing that they had salt in the area, and knowing that the government was looking at a salt mine in Kansas for high-level nuclear waste, that maybe they would have a good location. So they offered themselves up, and eventually Congress actually authorized the site in 1979. The site was actually ready to open and accept waste in 1988, but the political debating was not done. And eventually, in 1992, Congress passed a law that required the Environmental Protection Agency to certify the site. And this gave the state authority to regulate the site, to regulate the mixed waste at the site under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act site. Now, there were still complaints about transport, especially the city of Santa Fe did not want these materials transported right through the center of town, an issue. And eventually they built a ring road around Santa Fe just to distribute to transport the waste. And as Senator Domenici, who was on our commission, likes to point out all the time, that the property off of that ring road has now become some of the most valuable property in the Santa Fe area. This was not going to be for high-level waste. The waste that was going to go into WIPP was going to be limited to waste from the nuclear weapons complex, and it was going to be the long-lived but not very active waste. So the plutonium-contaminated gloves and booties and materials from the nuclear weapons complex. And in 1998, WIPP opened, and it has been operating successfully ever since. They've received over 10,000 shipments with no problems, and so it's the success story from the U.S. And for me, the important part is this shows we can do this in the United States. We need a new approach to storing and disposing of the waste. Well, that's a real shocker, I know. But what we specifically point out is that the approach has to be consent-based, it has to be adaptive, staged, transparent, and of course standards and science-based. But the consent-based part is important, and I think that's the piece that's missing, that was missing from the whole Yucca Mountain experience. We also say that we need a new organization dedicated solely to the management of waste to deal with this, and we recommend a FedCorp along the lines of the Tennessee Valley Authority. In the past, the Department of Energy, a sub-department within the Department of Energy, has managed this. And everybody we talked to, whether they were pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear, they all said, do not let the Department of Energy do this anymore. We need some new organization. So we listened to them. There is something called the Nuclear Waste Fund. It was established in 1982 by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. You guys probably live within PEPCO's reach or Dominion Power, and so part of your electricity is generated by nuclear power. And so you pay, as ratepayers, 1 mil, so 1,000th of a cent of a dollar per kilowatt hour for your electricity, for the Nuclear Waste Fund. Okay, and this Nuclear Waste Fund now has over about $25 million in it, but it's held by Congress, and Congress doles it out. Congress was doling it out to appropriators, to the Department of Energy, and of course it got caught up in politics. And actually, it really isn't there anymore because Congress has actually used it for other things, just like they've done with Social Security. So we want it back because it's ratepayer money. It's not taxpayer money. We feel that we need to really move quickly towards developing a geologic repository, one or more in the country. And we need to deal with interim storage of spent fuel. There are 10 reactors at 9 sites in the country that are completely shut down. And the only thing left at many of these reactors is the spent fuel. And that's really not economically a good way to do things. It's not a good way to do things in terms of security either. Now we face terrorist threats, and there's no point in having 9 sites when you could have 1 to guard instead of 9. So we think that this material should be prioritized for consolidation in one site. So we don't see any game changers, is the bottom line. We're going to need a repository no matter what. There's no magic technology out there that's going to make this waste disappear. Fukushima's, lessons learned from Fukushima will impact this anymore. I don't think we've learned anything significantly different in the past few months that's gonna change much in this report. Although yesterday we heard a lot of criticism about the spent fuel pools in the U.S. There were very many voices saying that we should move from this densely packed spent fuel pool to a low-density arrangement. So, you see, initially, the spent fuel pools in the U.S. were set up with these open racks, and not much was going to go into the spent fuel pools because we thought we were going to reprocess this material pretty quickly. So we didn't think it was going to spend too much time at the reactor site. We end up with these really packed spent fuel pools, and so the way we were able to pack all that fuel in the pool was to change the racks. So now we have these honeycomb racks that are fully metal all the way, and so if you lose the water in the pool, it means that air has a difficult time circulating around the fuel rods, and it means that they could overheat. Especially if you have recently discharged fuel in one location in the pool, you could end up melting down and releasing, theoretically, more radiation than is in the reactor core. So you could have an accident worse than Chernobyl. And I don't think we necessarily will have reprocessing in the U.S. I think it will remain more expensive for many, many more decades. And I think money will really be the bottom line in deciding this. But reprocessing also develops other waste streams that, in volume, it makes more waste than just throwing stuff directly away. So that, we have a hard enough time dealing with any waste in this country. Adding more to it, the problem will, it's too difficult. The only countries that reprocess right now, and they're very few, France, the UK, Russia, India, China is trying to get into it. Okay, so on one hand, Japan, sorry, more than one hand, one funny hand. But they're having, they all use a method where they can reprocess, they can recycle only once. Okay, they can't keep recycling. So what they do is they extract the plutonium, they make something called a mixed oxide or MOX fuel, which they put in their light water reactors. They cannot reprocess that MOX fuel and use it again. It has something to do with how the isotopics of the plutonium changes. Though France reprocesses, not all of its reactors use the MOX fuel, okay? Though England reprocesses, it uses none of its MOX fuel. And so the UK has a huge quantity of separated plutonium. 90 metric tons of separated plutonium. 90,000 kilograms of separated plutonium when you need only 4 for a nuclear bomb. And they have no plans to do anything with it because they don't have reactors that could use it again. And even with the 2 reactors that could use it as MOX fuel, they are not planning on using it. I have no idea what becomes of Yucca Mountain. Right now it's in courts. A couple of states and interest groups are suing DOE for pulling the license application for Yucca Mountain. I don't know where that's going to end up. But DOE has dismantled the Yucca Mountain program. So even if they were forced by court decision to start it up again, it's going to take a long time. And then Nevada will fight it again. Who knows what happens with it.
So the commission is making no recommendation?
We are not a citing commission. We are not recommending any sites. And we have not said anything about that. And we prefer not to. So your second question was?
Why not just construct more interim storage pools?
Right. Well, that's what we're doing. We're not constructing pools. We're constructing these dry casks. Okay. So that is our de facto solution right now. Okay. I personally don't think it is, and I think my commission members would, fellow commissioners would agree with me, that is not what we think should be the solution. Because that requires a long-term institutional structure for thousands of years. Because these dry casks, or the pools, will eventually break down. Okay? And they will eventually release radioactivity. You know, and if you're living right next to one, you're going to get it. It's going to go into your groundwater. So you're going to have to change these casks or these pools on a regular basis. And so that's not a solution. Okay? A solution is putting this in a place where it's not going to hurt us. And that place is some kind of mined repository.
Going back a little bit to the pools, you mentioned that you're in favor of unpacking the pools, that would be your personal preference, but that some other commissioners weren't for that. I'm wondering what their argument is.
They think that the pools are safe enough right now, which is the position of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Although I think they have agreed to finally take another look at this.
I think that's part of the post-commission review.
Yes, yes. Even though the National Academy of Sciences asked them in 2005, 2006 to do another study, which they never did. They're finally doing it.
Will the MOX plant at the Savannah River site, when it's in operation, make a contribution or create more problems with regard to the waste?
That's a good question. Well, it will make MOX spent fuel eventually. And the plutonium feed for that MOX plant is from nuclear weapons, okay, that have been designated as no longer necessary to the national security. It's not from the civilian sector. So, just to be clear on that. But you will eventually, when that fuel is used in reactors, whichever reactor actually steps up to use it. There were a couple that did step up and have backed off, so we'll see. But that will make MOX spent fuel. Now, MOX spent fuel over the long term is actually gives off 3 times the amount of heat as just regular old low-enriched uranium spent fuel. So it will require more space in the repository.
Is anyone looking into that aspect of it?
No.
Not yet?
No. We'll see if we can get the thing built. Yeah. The problem is right now, we had generic standards. Okay? In the 1980s, we had a generic radiation dose standard for any given repository. We changed that standard for Yucca Mountain. Okay? We made it's this weird standard that begins to apply 18 kilometers south of Yucca Mountain. Kind of an arbitrary number. And the standard is that the Yucca Mountain will not give a higher dose starting 18 kilometers south of Yucca Mountain, more than 15 milligrams per year to your average person for 10,000 years. And then for the period from 10,000 to 1,000,000 years, it will not give a dose higher than 100 milligrams per year. So it really kind of rubbed people the wrong way when the generic standard was thrown out and a specific standard was made for Yucca Mountain because it made people think that maybe there's something wrong with Yucca Mountain and they're trying to re-engineer the standard to fit the problem. And so other countries operate with just a single generic standard, and we think that that will be much more successful here. Okay. And it doesn't matter about the chemistry of the repository. In fact, I think there are certain things that you could require for a repository, and you could require that some of the chemistry be similar. Any other questions?
So in the interim, while we look for communities that would take and make good locations for repository, the high-level waste will then stay on site where it is now?
Yeah. Except for, we would like to also develop some interim sites for the reactors that shut down. And in anticipation of reactors that will begin to shut down, 10 years from now, because there will be other reactors that begin to shut down. And I think we need to anticipate that. That's the problem. We haven't anticipated any of this. We started out with nuclear power without dealing with the waste problem up front. And if you had an integrated strategy from the beginning on how to deal with the waste problem, we'd be much better off. But we don't. But now we're saying we really need